Hi, everybody. Mitch Tanenbaum here. This is the security news update for October 29th, 2023, almost Halloween. Thanks for joining me today. In the security and privacy alerts section, TikTok is apparently not the only Chinese company, here's a big surprise, that's stealing your data. Temu, which is just kind of vaulted onto the scene recently, is an app, and it is an app that sells cheap Chinese knockoff products at very low prices, thereby enticing people. Um, Also steals your data in a similar way that ByteDance does. I'm sorry, in a similar way that TikTok does, because they are also owned by ByteDance. Um, for government contractors, remember that the ban on TikTok is really a ban on ByteDance, not a ban on TikTok. So you might want to get ahead of the power curve before the government tells you, and make sure your users are not installing the Temu app either. Next, also in the privacy section, Applesoft created this privacy-centric thing back in 2020 to disguise your Wi-Fi MAC address, your physical address, hardware address. Apparently, due to a bug in the software, it actually never worked, and your address was never disguised. They finally fixed that 4 years later, and it is available for iOS 17.1 and also for iOS 16. Next, in the important issues, there's been a number of lawsuits recently against large language models like ChatGPT for theft of intellectual property, and other things too, but in this case, theft of intellectual properties. And researchers are reporting that they have been able to get large language models to print out or to spit out uh, large quantities of copyrighted material from places like Harry Potter and Gone with the Wind and Lolita. Um, it's going to be up to the courts to figure out whether this is fair use or not, but it certainly doesn't help ChatGPT's case and their lawsuits. Next, if you're old enough, you may remember when Apple devices were considered secure. That hasn't been for a while. And I'm sure Mr. Jobs would not be happy if he was still around. Apple pushed several fixes this week, including one for iPhones and iPads that's already been exploited. They were identified and tracked by the Russian security firm Kaspersky, and they have an interesting deal because they keep um, uh, uh, disclosing Russian hackers, and I can't imagine that Putin is terribly happy about that. But on the other hand, the Putin certainly has had the opportunity to make Kaspersky fall out of an upper story window, and he hasn't done that for whatever reason. So I'm assuming that Kaspersky's got some dirt on Putin and his friends, and that's the thing that's keeping him alive. Um, but anyway, this is a patch to a patch that was released in July that didn't really fix the problem. And three other bugs were patched that are also being used by unidentified spies in this case. Um, and what happened, and that particular vulnerability um, will infect and affect any Apple device ever made. And once compromised, what happens is the attackers install a backdoor called Triangle DB. They're using it right now for an espionage campaign called Operation Triangulation. So it would be good to go install those patches soon. In the legislative and legal department, the Cruise robotaxi license was revoked in California after one of their self-driving cars had an accident, and then it decided, which by the way was the other car's fault. Then it decided that it needed to pull over to the curb. In the process of doing that, it ran over a pedestrian, and then it dragged the pedestrian as it drove over to the curb. And the fire department had to extricate the pedestrian from underneath the car. All in all, not great for Cruise. So they've had their license revoked, so to speak. And we got to remember, even though all these stories make a lot of headlines, we kill tens of thousands of people with human-driven cars every year. So, you know, while nobody likes, and this person apparently will survive, while nobody likes these accidents, there's no evidence at this point that certainly that computer-driven cars are less safe than human-driven cars, and probably they're a lot safer, in fact. Next, an ex-NSA employee, and I say ex because he only worked there for a month, um, is pleads guilty to giving classified information. Well, he thought it was to Russia. It was really to an FBI agent. Uh, the transfer took place here in Denver at Union Station, which is kind of interesting. I wasn't there at the time, but it would have been interesting to watch the FBI slap those stainless steel bracelets on the guy. Um, he asked for $85,000. I'm always amazed. And there's another one, a Chinese situation where the guy asked for 15 grand. I'm thinking, you're running the risk of being in prison for the rest of your life, and you're asking for $85,000. Uh, and maybe he thought that this was a done deal, and he could just soak them for a lot of money over time. But boy, it just doesn't seem very bright. But then again, selling national defense secrets is not very bright anyway. So, I guess he wasn't very bright. Next, King Charles has signed off on the UK's Online Safety Act. Um, some vendors are saying that if this act is actually enforced, which would effectively ban end-to-end encryption, period, um, that they'll just leave the UK. The UK is not a big enough market for them to worry about. And one of those vendors is Apple. Um, that could make the regulator kind of pucker up, because if all of a sudden all of these Apple devices that people own don't work anymore in the UK, or at least don't have any cloud services, which is one of the reasons why they can use it as a telephone, right? And they can certainly go to any website that they want to with their browser, but the apps won't work anymore if these guys leave um, the UK. I would think that would give Ofcom some reason to pause and think about exactly what they really want to do and who they want to make upset with them, because obviously a lot of the people who use Apple devices are people in positions of power, like in the Parliament, and probably you don't want Parliament to be really really upset with you. Also, there's about to be a UK prime minister election, and the current prime minister probably doesn't want to be on the unemployment rolls, and this could potentially certainly help him get there. So this is just a bit of a mess. Um, a lot of these companies have always said, well, we're never going to go off and sell out our users, but when it comes down to it in the end, it usually comes down to money. Apple is a perfect example of that. They said, "Oh yeah, we value privacy." Well, except in China, where they're more than happy to let the Chinese government see any data that the government wants without any kind of warrant or judicial oversight. And they created some scam about how that exactly works. But fundamentally, what I said is how it works. And so we don't really know how this is going to come down in the end, but definitely something to watch for. A lot of countries are talking about doing this, and certainly, if Apple decides to leave the UK, which is far from a done deal, um, that will give other countries a lot of pause, because that would make a lot of citizens very, very unhappy with their government. Next, in the education department, how much cybersecurity expertise does a board actually need? And the SEC regulations require more information, more transparency. They did require, or they were talking about requiring, some specific requirements for cybersecurity expertise on boards, but they pulled that back at the very last minute. I think possibly because they didn't think there were enough board qualified cybersecurity resources to go do that for thousands of companies. But a recent study shows that 88% of Standard Poor's 500 boards do not have a single cybersecurity expert as a director. So that's doesn't bode well. If you need help, that is something that we do. Please contact us. In the breaches department, the MOVEit breach continues to surface itself. Unbelievable. Most recently, a company called Gen Digital, who most people have never heard of, but they're the owner of CCleaner, the disk cleaning software, Avast, Norton LifeLock, which most people have heard of, and Avira. Um, they didn't say how many users were affected, and they sort of said it only affected paid customers and blah blah blah. But they claim to have about 65 million paying customers across all of their products. So depending on what they actually fess up to in the long term, this could be a big addition to the already 60 million plus people that were affected by the Move It breach. Um, while some people have been talking about that ransomware is going away, yeah, right, not so. Um, September was actually the biggest month for ransomware in a long time. Um, and the Klopp group, who is the group behind the Move It breach, was quiet in September, which some people say may mean that they're gearing up for their next big attack. So stay tuned for that. We'll see what happens, but ransomware is clearly not going away. And then you have other breaches. The Irish police hired a vendor, and we see this more and more, right? Third party breach. Well, we hired this company and they didn't protect that. Well, you hired them. So, maybe you should have done a better job of vetting people before you hired them. By the way, that's also something that we do. Uh, the data that was exposed for 500,000 vehicles goes back to 2017 and includes high resolution scans of identity documents and other documents. So, not great. And of course, they'll blame it on the vendor. They said no comment. But this is like the third or fourth UK police related breach in 2023. So they're probably not feeling very good right now. Sorry, guys. Protect your stuff better. Um, Next, hackers were inside the city of Philadelphia's network for 3 months undetected. Um, and this is not the first time for Philly. They had a breach in 2020, actually two breaches in 2020. One that really uh, exposed 100 plus thousand records for disabled citizens, and then another 50,000 records in a different attack. Um, so, in this particular case, the city detected suspicious activity in May, but they're still investigating what the hacker stole. And, this is October, right? So, why are you still investigating? It tells me that your information security program is not very good. If, from May to October, almost November now, you're still investigating what happened. Next, Okta is in the hot seat again. One more attack. This time it was against their support platform. And one of the things that people do in the support platform is they upload dumps for the support guys to investigate. And these dumps often contain whatever happens to be in memory, which could be access tokens, could be passwords, could be whatever. And it can't be encrypted because otherwise they can't get to it. So Okta said that they're working with individual customers whose data was compromised, but just they're just having a challenge this year, for sure. Um, Next, this is sort of on the legal front, but Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows mostly the spies to collect data, the spies meaning our spies, the NSA, to collect data about American citizens when there is a foreign participant involved at one end of the conversation without a warrant. There's a lot of noise in Congress and a lot of evidence, in fairness, that the FBI in particular has abused the capability, and the intelligence community keeps saying that they cleaned up their act, and we keep hearing about more and more uh, episodes of inappropriate use of these things. So the Congress, when they originally wrote this thing, it was after 9/11. They had it expire after every 5 years, and Congress has to renew it, otherwise it goes away. There have been a number of provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Service Act related laws that have gone away since 9/11. This one may be the next one. The intelligence community will not be happy if this one goes away. They're going to be pushing hard on Congress to get it renewed, but it's highly unlikely that it'll get renewed with no changes to it. And given all the things that Congress has to do between now and December 31st, which is like 60 days roughly, um, and that would include things like funding the government. Uh, the 702 may wind up being dead on arrival, and it may expire at the end of the year. And if it does expire, then getting it renewed becomes much more difficult because now you're talking about basically adding a new capability. And there's certainly a lot of folks for different reasons on both the Republican side and the Democratic side who dislike government snooping on American citizens for whatever great reason they have. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, and that will self resolve within the next 2 months. Either they will go off and renew it, or they won't renew it. Next, Twitter is becoming even more of a cesspool, whatever they call themselves now, X. Um, there were a number of verified accounts that were apparently reporting, not apparently, that were reporting that the murderer who killed 18 people in Maine this past week had been captured, even though he had not been captured, and showed pictures of him kneeling on the ground in front of the police, which he wasn't doing because they hadn't captured him. In fact, they only found him after he committed suicide some number of days later. Um, there were a number of people who retweeted uh, these um, these claims that people had made. Um, in the United States, there's really no penalty for these guys not having any kind of way of monitoring these things. But in the rest of the world, there are penalties. In the Europe, the penalties can be as much as 10% of Twitter's global revenue, which would not make Musk very happy. But probably more importantly, what this does is drive down the viewership from more sane individuals of Twitter, which of course also drives down advertisers, which drives down their revenue. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, yeah, I think Mr. Musk has some challenges here in terms of trying to clean this up, and I don't know that he's doing a great job of it. But it's up to him. He owns it. He bought it. He paid his $44 billion for it. And now he gets to deal with it. Lastly, in the news bites, I think it's kind of interesting. The Marines did a demo, and this is only a demonstration, strapped a rocket launcher to a dog. Now, before everybody gets all upset, this was not a real dog. This was a mechanical dog, one they bought on Amazon for about $5,000. Um, and the thing that's interesting about this is, they're able to have the dog, go wherever they wanted it to go, and launch the rocket. And actually, even this, cheesy Amazon dog survived the launch of the rocket, which is pretty impressive. But the thing about this, especially if you used a mil spec dog as opposed to a commercial dog, this potentially is much safer for soldiers than having to get someplace where they don't want to be to launch a rocket against bad guys. So kind of interesting. Speaking of robots, University of Oregon this week had to quarantine all their food delivery robots because they were concerned that the robots might deliver a bomb instead of a pizza. Um, this seems very doable in terms of kind of corrupting things, um, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. They were able to go off and get the robots to go to a deserted part of campus where the bomb squad could open up all the robots and investigate them. Uh, but but if people think that their food delivery robot maybe delivering a bomb instead of delivering a pizza, that's probably not great for the people who are using robots to do that. Um, Politics, and this is nothing new, politics is a full contact sport. There's somebody who is running for local, I mean statewide, legislature who apparently is in doing some adult entertainment work perfectly legal. Uh, the Republicans, this person's a Democrat, the Republicans sent out mailers basically advertising this person as adult entertainer, um, which that she and her husband are sort of, kind of, but not like many adult entertainers. And the reality is that a number of adult entertainers have been elected to local offices. So this, doesn't seem like out of the realm of possibility. But clearly, this is a smear campaign, and perfectly legal. Although it may get them in trouble for violating the revenge porn law in that state. So that'll be interesting all by itself. But it just points to that, politics doesn't really have any guardrails on it. Next, Google is apparently somewhat scared, or a lot scared, of Microsoft and Amazon. They have updated or upgraded their investment in Anthropic, who is a competitor to ChatGPT. They just added another $1.5 billion to it. That brings their contribution to Anthropic to $2 billion. Amazon has invested $4 billion. I think they had $1.5 billion before that. So puts them at $7 billion, something like that. Remember, Microsoft invested $10 billion, or said they're going to invest $10 billion in ChatGPT. So there's a lot of money in this space. That's, I think, the key point there. And it'll be interesting where it goes. But clearly, there's a lot of money betting that they're going to make a lot of money off of this. And lastly, we don't have any kind of national cybersecurity laws. We don't have any kind of national privacy laws. And what that does is cause different agencies, different verticals, to add their own rules. So the newest one to that is the Federal Trade Commission, which is responsible for regulating under the FTC safeguards rule, is responsible for regulating financial service institutions and mortgage lenders and car dealers and people like that. And they just added a new rule that said that they have 30 days to report breaches, which in terms of the current generation laws is really, really long. So, the feds are talking about, for people who do business with the government, requiring them to report breaches in 8 hours. So 30 days seems like a ridiculously long period of time, but nonetheless, that's what the FTC did. But that will only affect certain verticals, and different verticals than what the SEC recently did. So, the challenge from a business standpoint, it makes me almost, appreciate, and I do appreciate, the need for national laws. But the problem is, because of the lobbying, national laws will be very, very weak if they are in fact enacted. If you have questions or need assistance, please reach out to us. Otherwise, until next time, stay safe, and thanks for listening.
Turnkey Cybersecurity and Privacy Solutions offers the complete cybersecurity program for small to medium-sized businesses. They include everything needed to secure your business and meet compliance requirements. Visit our website at turnkeycybersecurityandprivacysolutions.com to learn more.